This is the Fuel Your Life podcast, where we help you find, unleash, elevate your leadership in order to create a loving, impactful, freeing energy within you and around you. And now for your hosts, John Troutman and Charles Draper. Here we are. This is back with another episode of Fuel Your Life. I am John Troutman, and I am speaking with my good friend Charles Draper. How are you this morning?
I'm good, and you?
Dude, I'm great. Got up, did a nice little F3 workout, so got a workout in and some fellowship in, and now I'm here. Yeah. So, couldn't be a better morning.
Yeah, I met up with some F3 guys this morning as well. We had a little Wednesday Bible study, and
nice.
I rushed on over here. So, excited to get on here and kick things off again. It's been a little while. Right? The 4th of July holiday, and I think we're both out of town.
Yep.
Back, so it's good to be back in the same space, even if it is virtually. And
yep.
Good to see you, man.
It's good to see you too. Good to see you too. So what's on your mind this morning?
Well, we've kind of been on this theme of family, right? So we've talked about the husband-wife relationship. We've talked about kids and how to bring them up and what that looks like. And so just kind of wrapping up family and that kind of stuff. And who knows, who knows what we'll come up with next week or whenever we meet again. Something that's been on my heart lately is in a season we're moving into. So I have a 10-year-old, I have a 7-year-old, and I have a 3-year-old. Well, an almost 10-year-old. In about 2 weeks, I'll have a 10-year-old. So we're getting into those preteen days. And conversation me and my wife's been having a lot is just purity. And so I wanted to really jump into that this morning. I will give a disclaimer. Well, first off, I can speak for myself. I think I can speak for John too, but I'll let him confirm or deny. But we are not professionals in anything. And we're definitely not professionals in purity as far as what that looks like and how to talk to kids about that. But it's been a conversation around our home between me and my wife. Like, when do we start having conversations about purity? And, I have 3 girls, and, they're all, getting, they're going to get older. They're going to be going through all the body changes. Even if you have boys, they go through those body changes as you get in those preteen years. So what does that look like? How do we start? How do we jump into that? And what does that look like as we move into this season? So kind of wanted to have some conversation around that, whether we land on a lot of things or whether we land with more questions than answers this morning. That may be where we're at, but really just talking about the importance of that conversation. And where my heart is, we talk about training up our kids. We talked about last time, our kids, they don't know what they don't know. And if we're not teaching them and talking to them about things, and how are they going to know and learn? And so through that, me and my wife, past couple of weeks, just been saying, our oldest is about to turn 10. Where do these conversations start? And I'm a strong believer that if we as parents aren't having that conversation, then somebody else is. And it's probably going to be presented in a light that we don't want. So we've dug into some different literature and stuff. Dr. Dobson, he's got a book called Bringing Up Girls that we've been listening to on and off on Audible for the past couple of years, just listening to specific chapters and stuff, and some good information there. And then my wife just got this book that was recommended to us. I'll have to look up the title here in a minute for those that are listening, that talks about how to talk with your sons and daughters about purity, and actually walks you through like a weekend event that you can pull your son or daughter one-on-one away. The father can pull the son, the mother can pull the daughter, and start having those conversations of purity and how we protect that. So yeah, I kind of want to jump into that this morning. I don't know, John, do you have initial thoughts before I move a little bit deeper?
Well, this is a big topic. So I just, to clarify, I think for our sake, but also for our listeners' sakes, for those that you don't understand, when we say purity, we're talking about, really sexual purity in a sexually crazy world, in a world that glamorizes, I'll just say sexual activity, period. And it's beginning to, even start younger and younger and need to be addressed in interesting ways. Now I think this will be, I'll say, fun conversation, but I can say it's fun a little bit for me because my boys are not quite at the age where we're really addressing specifically these things. I mean, we're starting to address things like understanding your body parts. That's an important thing when kids are really young, and those things. But this is such a big topic, I think, for our generation. And I'm actually curious. I would love to have a conversation with some of the older generation, like my parents and stuff, and their thoughts on when we were growing up and how they felt like they needed to address it. Actually, you brought up Dr. Dobson, which is someone, he would have been more speaking to my parents' generation most of the time. And I know my parents really love Dr. Dobson. So I'm just curious, like, their thoughts and how the thoughts have developed to where, like, this is a big topic for our generation. I mean, I have boys that the oldest is 6, and I can't tell you with how many friends we've had the conversation of, like, hey, what does this look like, to start bringing it up now, where, we're not really talking about purity in terms of sexual purity yet, but we are talking about understanding your body and the parts that are yours and the parts that are not yours, and just trying to start developing that attitude a little bit and the mentality of, so that we have a framework to have that conversation at a later point when we are being more specific. So I'll say that it's been interesting to me. It may be fun for me just because my kids are not at that age yet to think about. But as a campus minister, as someone who has this conversation pretty consistently with college students, I will say, and I think we'll get into this, but I think we need to have maybe more nuanced conversations around this than ever before, because it's in your face all the time, because we don't have as clear boundaries as we would like to have. I know people don't love hearing that sometimes, but I do think that there's not explicit instructions in Scripture. There's not explicit instructions of this is what you can, this is what you can't, and it's much more nuanced in terms of purity. And from a parental perspective, we need to be aware of that. I think that's important coming from a campus minister and someone who's talking about this on a consistent basis. And, hey, what does this look like? What does it look like to have a healthy physical relationship in college, and yet you're not married? And so, like you don't want to overstep boundaries that you need to uphold. And how do we really think through this well? So I'm excited to dive in. That's my introduction, I guess, and my thoughts on it. So
yeah, and I feel underprepared to talk about this, but I'm just going to share my heart and what I've currently been going through, and then we'll go from there. And it may be a part 2 where we do a little bit of digging a little bit deeper. But no, I mean, just as we look at, you mentioned about our parents' generation versus ours. Well, the mentality, just look at our TV versus their TV.
Mm-hmm.
Look at what we get on our phones versus what they didn't have on a phone, right? Like, just the in-your-faceness of it. Like, our kids are at a younger age getting exposed to more information and more, I guess, sexual content in a sense. Like, even since I've been a principal and been in education over the past 13 years, I mean, the conversations are beginning younger and younger and younger because of it. So, I'm a strong believer that, you need to keep their innocence as long as you can, but you also need to get ahead of it. And what does that look like? And so, as I've been reading, and Dr. Dobson does a great job in a couple of chapters talking about just how our bodies are made, and how just as girls go through their maturing cycle, in the teenage age, and boys too, like, we are made with this innate desire to have intimate relationships with one another. Like, that is embedded in us. And it's pretty neat. And I'm not going to get into the specifics because I don't know them off the top of my head, and I'm not a doctor. But anyway, so but
it's not
with
this
that
podcast.
that is embedded within us. So how do we start talking to for me, my daughters, and at what age do we start talking to them about, hey, this is coming and this is what this is going to look like? And not necessarily me, but how does my wife do that? And not just hope that an older sibling explains it. Not just hope that they get it in their health class, or not just hope that they come and ask us. So I think that's the first piece, is how are we having these kind of conversations, and where do we start? And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know the answer to that. I was just looking up the book that my wife just ordered, this Passport to Purity by Dennis and Barbara Rainey. It's an older book, but it's one that was suggested to us just as we get into these preteen years, and actually walks you through some of this conversation. We got it. It just came in the mail yesterday, so I'm telling you, it's kind of hot off the press. My wife's reading through it, and I've kind of perused through it. But even are we setting our kids up to and whenever I talk about purity, I think we go straight to, and the way you framed it is like sex, but it starts before that. Mm-hmm. So how are we protecting our children's hearts? So it starts with that first crush, that first, I'm going to hold your hand, that the first time you hold, a little girl holds another boy's hand, you're giving away a piece of you that through just those feelings, through that tie. And then, from that point moving forward, the first time you tell a boy you love him, you're giving away a piece of you. And are you thinking through that? Are you just doing that? And are you downgrading it? And do we share the first kiss, the first hug, I guess hug should come before kiss, but all those pieces really lead into how are we talking to our kids about each one of these things. And I'm just going to be honest with you, I've listened to this chapter a couple of times in Dr. Dobson's book that, bringing up girls, he talks about, at the age of 16, and I don't know if it's him, he was telling this story. But anyways, talks about a father and mother gave their daughter permission at 16 she could start dating. And so they took them out to a big dinner, an elaborate dinner. They actually had a big birthday party, right? They had a big party, presents, they cleaned up, and then they went out to dinner that night. And she was so excited. She's like, I can finally date. And the parents sat down and said, yeah, but here's kind of the contract. And they actually made it that serious. Like, here is an expectation. And then they said, I have one last gift for you. And their daughter, this box, she unwrapped it, a small box, and she opened it up, and it was this beautiful bracelet. And the bracelet had 6 different green emeralds around it, and then it had another number of emeralds. One was like a marble stone, and then there was a pearl, and then there was a diamond, and there was these couple other stones. But as she was excited to see it, she said it was beautiful, and the dad gave it to her and said let me explain what this is. And I'm going to mess this up. I don't have it written down. I wasn't planning to really talk about this morning, so I'm going by memory. So if I miss something, please forgive me. But he said, here's my one expectation as you start dating. Before you hold a boy's hand, see this little stone here? It's a piece of marble. It looks simple. It doesn't look nearly as extravagant as other. Before you even hold a boy's hand, you got to take this charm off this bracelet and give it to the boy that you want to hold their hand, because you're giving them a piece. And then he said, before you decide to kiss a boy, there's a charm for each one. Before you decide to tell a boy you love them, there's a pearl for that one. You got to be willing to give them that charm. And then the diamond is before you'll take a boy's hand. There may have been one other one in there that I missed, but really framed it in that sense of you can date, but here's the expectation, you are that important. And each one of these things, you're giving away a piece of you. And I ain't gonna lie, as I was listening to it, I have girls, so it really resonates with me. Like I was driving down, I mean, I had tears boiling up my eyes. I've listened to this thing twice, and the first time it wasn't new, but this, I was like, man, like, I've never looked at it like that. And John, I don't know, maybe you have, but I've never really looked at and now I'm looking at it as a father. Like as a boy, I was like, yeah, like, I mean, yeah, she's pretty. I want to hold her hand. I want to kiss her. I want to tell her I love her. I mean, I ain't gonna lie. Like, I mean, that's how I was wired. But, and so then she goes on to say, all right, like I had my bracelet on, and she said, I was sitting by a pool or doing such and such, and I was reading my book, and this boy came over, showed me some attention. I really wanted to hold his hand. But she said we started walking to a different location, and I wanted to hold his hand. But man, I was so mad because I knew I had that charm on my wrist, and I didn't want to give it to him. And she said, and as he's explaining the story, he's saying how the daughter was just so irritated, but waited and didn't, and then realized that she really didn't want to hold his hand, do the other things, and then she ended up saving her entire bracelet for the man that she married. Now, that's in an ideal world, but it was framed in such a way to where these things are things that we don't just give to people like it should be that important. But then, and man, as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking this is so countercultural. It is so but I mean, if you're a female listening to this, did anybody ever share it in that essence? As a boy, did a dad ever sit down and say, like, like we're called to honor, to honor one another. This is how we do it whenever we're looking to court a girl, whenever we fall. And once again, I don't have all the answers, but man, as I listen to that, conviction flew all over me, and I thought, you know what? That's what I want my daughter to be able to do one day. And maybe not, right? Like maybe it cuts sideways. Maybe you do give it, but how are we framing this as parents? Of how am I setting up my girls and teaching them and training them up, and whether they take it or not? And that's what in this chapter that talked about, like, all you can do is present it to them, and then you got to pray and hope that they can follow in that guidance. And if they don't, you still wrap around them because they're still your daughters, they're still your sons, and you're still going to love them no matter what. But so I've just been thinking, like, how do we as parents with our preteens, how are we front loading this? And do we wait too long? Do we wait too long to start having that? Because, in fifth grade, like, kids are wanting to date, but do you talk to your kids about why we're not dating yet? Like why we wait until this? And that's something as a family you're going to have to land on. But I think there's some really good literature and people that's already been through it, because I haven't been through it. And that's what I'm learning from, is those that have already walked through it and done it well. And the lady that gave us this book, her name's Penny, and her husband's name's Jeff, and it's just a couple that we really adore. And they've raised girls as well, and they've walked through this, and it hasn't been perfect. I'm sure it hasn't, and I'm not going to share it, but I'm sure it hasn't. But they've used these resources to kind of front load it with their girls and to start having that conversation. So I don't know, so that's kind of why, as we started talking this morning, was like, where are we going with family? Are we ready to move on? And I was like, I don't know, man. Like, I just feel like we need to talk a little bit about purity, and I don't know where this is going to go, but maybe there's somebody listening to this morning that has kids that hadn't thought about it. Maybe this sparks a thought in your mind, like, I need to figure out what this looks like, because I got some preteens coming up. Maybe you have 1 and 2 year olds, and you need to start thinking, when do we start this? What does it look like? So I don't know, like, that's kind of my heart this morning, is I don't think we talk about enough. I think it's uncomfortable, right? Like, who wants to have that conversation with their kids? But if we're not having it with them, then somebody else is. Somebody else is influencing those decisions. And so we have to be intentional about it. And then if we don't have it and things cut sideways, I mean, then we're so I don't know. I just I think I've rambled enough, but that's kind of my heart a little bit this morning, and just kind of wanted to get the conversation rolling, and just see where it goes today.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love just love your heart in it. And I think there's some really important things that you said that I'm like, man, that's spot on. But to be intentional is, you cannot, and especially in this area, in our day and age, it requires intentionality. It may look different. You don't have to do a lot of things. But I tell you, there was a girl in campus ministry with us and when we were in college. I don't even know if you know who this is, but I'm not going to say any names. But she shared with my wife when they were in college one time, and it stuck with her to the point my wife said this several times. But that her dad, when she, I think, was 16, the age, whenever she came of dating age, according to their family, her dad, the first thing was take her on a date. And he treated her like he was taking his own wife on a date, like in many ways, and just said, like, this is how I expect a guy to treat you. And if a guy's not going to treat you this way, don't date him. You know, and so she had that expectation of this is what a date looks like now. And she had it from someone who she valued his perspective, someone who was willing to invest in her. Like they got to see what it's like to have conversation together, to be totally focused on each other while they were there. And I mean, that's exactly kind of what you said with that story from the book. But whatever that looks like, there's a sense of being intentional and making the space to show what this looks like in terms long before you're talking about the actual act of sex or anything. Every piece, and I love that kind of the way you framed it and the way I guess Dr. Dobson even frames it, every piece is an emotional piece. And what really is significant, what we have to be speaking of, is the emotional regulation, in the sense of you're going to be wanting, our kids will be wanting to give this away. As kids, we were wanting to give this away. Like every desire in us said it. But how do we maintain the self-control of just being human and upholding each other as human, even in the sense of holding a hand? It's not an object of just holding a hand. You are holding someone's hand. And so you're teaching your children to think through that, however. That's really, I think, a lot of the nuanced conversation is teaching your children not to just see object, but to see a. Because when you see a person, then it's a lot more than just getting what you want and being able to hold a hand or give a hug or whatever. Like, there are emotions behind it, and you are, in some ways, exchanging the emotion, if you will. And so I think you're teaching your children to see that as you're walking through this. So I think that's really cool, but it takes such intentionality to be able to do that. And long before you're having these conversations, it takes a consistent desire to be connected to your children. Like, you've got to earn the right to be able to speak into your children's lives as well, especially when it comes to this topic. Because our cultures, I think as we have these conversations within campus ministry, most often the conversation we're having, it's not even around Scripture. Here we agree on an authority of Scripture when I'm speaking to students, and yet I often don't even use that. Sometimes I use it a little bit. But the reason I don't use it is because they view it as like this old book that doesn't really speak into our culture. And I mean, that floors me, of course, because that's not true at all. But so I use this idea, and I'll take the idea of self-control maybe, which is a fruit of the Spirit. I also think it is like the human peace. When God made us in His image, the peace He was giving us is self-control. Maybe not the piece, but one of the huge pieces is He gave us self-control. That was being made in God's image. We're not beast. We are human. We have self-control. And so I'll use that from Scripture maybe. And then we talk about the lies of, I don't use lies, but, we talk about how this is an emotional act. Whatever it is, whatever contact you're having, whether it's putting your arm around someone or, giving them a hug, giving them a kiss, it's an emotional act when you're in a relationship with them. And every time you give it an emotional act, the emotions increase. And so that's more of like what bringing to light. And we can use we can use studies of science to actually bring that to light and say, hey, this is an emotional act. Like, whatever you see on TV is like this emotionless act of whatever it is, it's just not true. And now we can bring that back, and now we can start having a conversation to a much deeper level, because we're talking about other people. We're talking about how we interact with other people. We're talking about the emotions that are being exchanged, and we're talking about how to handle that really well. I hope that helps, but to me, like, as you're talking about this, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the idea of self-control, and how do we teach self-control in an area where our society says you don't really need to. You don't really need to have that much self-control. And so, yeah, I love it. So I'm curious, though, as we talk about this intentionality, and now you're starting to think about it as a dad of girls. And I'm just curious, what's your first step in talking to we'll say your oldest?
Well, I mean, that's kind of where we're at right now. You should be having a conversation with your kids, like, nobody touches you where your bathing suit is, those kind of conversations. So, those kind of things start. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of where we're going. It's like, how quickly do we delve into this? How deep do we get? How quick? What does it look like? As bodies start to change, as all the things start to happen with the teenage girl, like, it's, those things are coming. And already in school, they're teaching them, but they're telling them, like, what happens with your body whenever this happens. So that's kind of where we are, is how quickly do we move into that? And really looking at, she's about to be 10, and a lot of body changes are going to be happening the next year or so. And so now's the time. And so I guess that's where we're at, is we're trying to just navigate it. How quick do we move into it? What does it look like? She's going to be in 5th grade. A lot of things start happening in 5th grade, 6th, 7th, 8th grade conversations. So, I mean, we're right on the brink of it. So how do we prepare her before she gets into it? And was reading some stuff, and, it really talked about how from the age like 10, 11 to 15, your kids are going to make decisions based around this purity topic that will follow them the rest of their lives. Mm-hmm. And they're going to start setting that groundwork. So if we're not framing it and having conversations, so I don't know, man. Like, that's a tough question to ask, but or to answer, I guess. You asked it. I'm not really answering it, but
it was easy for me to ask.
Yeah, I know it was. So I appreciate that, but I don't know. And that's just where, I mean, really, if our listeners, if they have thoughts, we're definitely open. But I think it does start with the basics, though. Why we're not dating. Like, not just say, like, you can't date because I said, right? Like, what does that look like? And the why behind it. Not just because I said so, but, like, here's part of that. Here's what this can look like. And, what does it look like whenever you start to have these feelings, and how do we handle it? And, are we just going to walk around and kiss every boy in our class? No, because we wouldn't, like, that's not modeled, right? Like, that's not. So what do those things look like? And just start framing those conversations, and being intentional about it, and also protecting where she is too as a person. Like that, our oldest, she's very innocent, and but also knowing that reality is that's gonna. I want to equip her before those questions come up, with how to move forward and handle them, and even just how to have open conversations. It not being odd to come home and say, hey, like, I have this feeling about this boy, or this boy asked me to hold his hand, or, like, it starts there, right? Because if you can't have that conversation, you're definitely not going to have the tough conversation of, hey, A, B, C, and D happened at school, or, so really starting that process is where our heart is, and starting to work through it.
Yeah. I tell you, you better be prepared to have those conversations. That's they're going to catch you off guard. But I'll say, one thing I think about with my boys, and I think this is important with girls as well, but there needs to be a point, and I think, a certain age that you celebrate their coming of age. You celebrate their journey into adulthood. Our culture says you become an adult at age 18, which is actually, I think, later than when you should celebrate that time, because it's the idea of your body's changing. There's this physical change in you. You're starting to, all that. I'm not going to get into that. That's not this podcast. But, as your body's changing, sometime around that point, there needs to be a recognition and even a celebration that this is really good. Like, this is a great thing, and you are becoming, for us, you are becoming a man. Now, let's talk about what that is. And it needs to be, like, for me, I want this to be something special where I'm inviting other men that I really love and respect to speak into my boys of, this is what it means. This is what it is to be a man. And it's not like, hey, you're powerful. It's not, anything. It's your character. This is what the character is of someone who's truly a man. And we're building that now. I mean, one of our rules for our family is always be respectful. And that comes back to what I just said of, like, learning to be human is to respect people. And so always be respectful. And we use that rule quite often, just even in our home. Like, you want them to respect me. I want them to feel free to voice their opinion, and at the same time do it in a very respectful way. And so we're trying to teach that now, but there's a sense where when they come of age, like this, there's this idea that we've been implanting for a long time, but to be a man, you need to be respectful, which means you have the opportunity to honor women for who they are, not for how good they look, not for, whatever clothes they may wear or whatever, but because they are a woman who is also made in the image of God. You get to honor them as a woman. You also get to honor other men as men. And that looks different in your friendships, but you want to be respectful. Now, I want to model that in my home, of course, but to show that respect, and we want to be able to have that conversation of, this is what it looks like to respect that. This is what it looks like to respect that once you get into a relationship.
I think, as like the whole charm bracelet, if that's what that is, it's a celebration of, like, hey, here's a responsibility, but here's a way to help you navigate this, and to remember the significance of each choice you make as you start moving into a relationship with, a girl with a boy, like, as you start moving in that relationship. And I agree. I think, but how serious do we take that, right? Like how does that look? Because I agree, it needs to be like a celebration. Like, I mean, as it talked about this girl in the meet, like, she was pumped, like, she's ready to start dating, like, and they weren't squashing that, but they said, hey, listen, like, yeah, we're excited too, but here's some safeguards, right? Like, here's some things we're gonna give you, and we're gonna teach you about, and we're gonna task you with, so that as you move into this, you have some tools to help protect your heart.
Yep.
To help to protect you. And I think as you move, and even with boys, the same thing. Like, here's some tools that you have so that you help protect your heart. It's not just the girls. I'm talking about girls because I have 3 girls. You have boys. But, like, boys too, like, we got to protect our hearts. We have to put those safeguards in place, because if not, lust is one of those sins that the Bible talks about often. Sexual immorality, it is talked about often. And it gets started, I think, because we're not raising up our kids in such a manner, or giving them the tools, having those conversations of, what does this look like? And also, like, I mean, me and my wife, we weren't perfect in it. Nobody is. But, as we get into that, there's a lot of experience that we've went through, and a lot of those feelings. So I think that intentionality's got to be there. For the boy.
Well, what I love about that, the idea of the bracelet, I mean, you don't have to use that, but I think the principle is really profound, is they never said, by giving the bracelet, they were never saying, hey, don't do this. And I think that's so important, because, I mean, even raising toddlers, you tell a kid, hey, don't do this, and it's immediately like, well, okay. But if you can give something to recognize the profundity of what they are. You like that word? That was good, wasn't it? You might want to check and make sure it's a word, but it's
sounded fun.
Yeah, yeah. The profundity of what they are doing and what they're giving, like that, then it at least makes them think. And, like it's you, even with the idea of the bracelet, more often than not, it's not going to be one person that you give every charm to, likely. But she's recognizing, like, hey, I'm not just giving this to anybody. Like, I'm not just giving this to a guy off the street. I mean, boy, girl, that doesn't matter. When they start recognizing how profound these certain things are, they just give more thought. I mean, they just give more thought to it.
And I need to explain one more piece about that bracelet. I talked about how there were 6 emeralds around the bracelet. I didn't address those. But those emeralds were explaining that no matter what, you're beautifully and wonderfully made. They always stay on the bracelet.
That's a good point.
And so even though you may give one away, you are still beautifully and wonderfully made, no matter what you've given away. And those never will leave. Those are there. Those aren't torn, like they're in the bracelet itself. And I don't know, like you just jogged my memory. I never circled back to that, but like those are pieces that you're going to give, and you may not, probably won't give them all to one person. I mean, I hope all my daughters could say that, but maybe not, right? And that's okay. Right. But at the end of the day, you still have those other emeralds. So no matter what happens, you're still beautifully and wonderfully made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that I wanted to make that point earlier, so I'm glad you brought that up, because that's true. Like that's you are. But yeah, so just the whole point of like not just telling your kid, nah, don't do this, but actually recognizing how profound.
Like, this is coming. And yes, you have permission, but know the gravity of it. And I would dare say, some people, whenever I first heard this, I was like, holding a hand, I never thought about that. Like the emotional ties that binds, right? Like holding someone's hand or hugging someone, like doing those things, but protecting your heart, even in those small, because you can start talking about holding hands and hugging. I mean, now, right? Like you could start talking about that with a significant, boy or whatever. Like that's kind of where the conversation starts. Like I start off at the most simplest point, like, we got to protect against these things, and then you move up through that list as they get to the age where it's time. So I don't know, like start small and work up. It's like everything, you build it piece by piece.
Well, and like I even think about with my boys, and like just holding my wife's hand and being like, man, I am so glad your hand is the hand I get to hold. And let my boys hear that, because they're recognizing, oh, mama's special because daddy gets to hold her hand, like, and that's the only hand he holds, or well, their hands, of course, but like I don't go hold any other woman's hand. I'm holding my wife's hand, and just like those little comments, but they stick, and you're making a big deal out of those small things.
Being intentional about talking about it, because we can't just assume that they catch it.
Right. Of course. Right.
So like at young age, like where your kids are, like, it's modeled, right? You see it. But as you get older, explaining like, here's why you don't see me holding everybody's hand that I walk beside of. Here's the significance of this, because at some point we got to bring that out and articulate that to where they're like, oh, okay, like that is a little bit more intimate. This is why I don't just go up and hug anybody on the street, because whenever I'm hugging, like, this is what I'm. So I don't know, just but being intentional about those conversations, and I don't know, maybe like I said, I feel like we've brushed over this, and as I navigate this, as we go through this, I'd be more than happy to share more. But I really just want to implore our listeners, like, if you have kids, and maybe you don't have kids, but maybe this is something that maybe you're. I mean, I know I got a 4th and 5th grade student that watches our podcast occasionally, and maybe they're listening to this. They need to go talk to their parents a little bit about this, or maybe you're in middle school or high school, and this is something that I encourage you to go talk to your parents about it, and let them guide and direct you, because that's what I believe. That's one of the reasons why I'm put here on this earth, is to guide and direct my kids in all things, in the truth. And so I don't know, just that purity, I think it's super important. I implore any parents Like, you got to start having these conversations, because if you don't have them, the culture will influence them, either through what they watch, what they see, what they read, what they Google, or the friends that they talk to who have probably watched, seen, or Googled the things that they know, because parents are taking this as seriously as what they ought to.
Yeah, and I hope that's. I hope that changes. I do. I hope that that's a slow shift being made. It's not easy, but I hope it changes. I think one of the last things an idea that I'd like to maybe just kind of, as we close up, end with. But, we have one word in English for love, but the Greek had 4 different types of loves that they talked about. And I won't get into all of them, but, agape is the one that we are so familiar with. Agape is the idea of self-sacrificial love. It's the idea of God's love towards us, hopefully our love towards God, and our love towards really other people. I mean, we're called to agape everyone, honestly, as we follow Jesus. But then there was eros, which was more of the romantic love. When you think of the word erotic, which is more of supposed to be a romantic thing. But, that was really specifically for a relationship. And I think, we talk about, because biblical writers talked about agapeing, so self-sacrificial love towards your wife. Paul talks about that, and talks about the wife loving their husband that way. And so biblical writers talk about that. So we talk about that often in our marriages, but we often don't talk about how unique our love for our spouse is in this eros term. Like, we have a unique love for them as well. That gets to be displayed in how we physically interact with our spouse. I mean, that's from the way we hug our spouse, the way we hold their hands out in public, to, much more. And I think we need to have that framework. I think it's beneficial, I would say, to have that framework even as we're talking to our kids, recognizing that we hear the word love and we think so many different things. We don't have words for it, but there is a special love for someone that you get to spend the entirety of life with. You get to experience most of life with. And there's a special type of love that really is for them. And I just think that can help maybe navigate the nuanced conversation that we get to have. I don't know, maybe it doesn't help people, but I do think it's important to understand, like, our English does us a disservice when we talk about love, because we're not really as specific as we need to be of the type of love that we get to display in the moment. And sometimes because there's so much overlap. But there are different loves for different relationships, and they look different. And specifically for, the spouse relationship, or what's the word I'm looking for? Just a special type of relationship, the romantic relationship. That's the word I'm looking for. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I think that's good stuff.
There's a lot there, but I think it's a good topic just to put out there and have people start chewing on, and what does it look like? And so something we're going through, and we don't have all the answers, but you know what? You can seek them out and pray that the Lord give you guidance and how to handle them. So that's what we're doing.
Yep. Yeah. Well, man, good conversation. Hopefully this is beneficial, especially for people who are beginning to walk through these conversations or walking through them, or people who one day will, like us, and even start thinking about that now. But man, I'm glad you shared. I'm glad you were willing to put it out there. And this is a topic. I mean, it's a big topic in our cultures. Yeah, we'd love some feedback. We'd love to hear your perspectives. I think you said it well. We don't know what we're doing yet when it comes to this. Not that you ever really do, because every kid is different. Just ideas are very powerful. And so we love to hear other ideas. So give us feedback. You can reach us at FUELyourLIFE. You can reach us. I'm on Instagram, TroutmanJA. I don't know how you want people to reach you. Yeah.
I mean, you can find me on Facebook. I know I'm old, so check me out on there, Charles Draper, or shoot us an email. So
yeah, it's been great. Love it. All right,
man.
We
Till next
will
time.
talk to y'all later. See ya.
See ya.